afternoon, good evening, everyone. And it gives me great pleasure to be part of hosting this event on taking the temperature report, which is a collaboration between the British Council India, FICCI, and Artex Company, and with an aim to track and monitor the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the creative sector in India. The study aims to poll artists and creative professionals, arts organizations, creative businesses, policymakers, funders, and other stakeholders within the sector. The first edition of the report, which is already available and which provides a snapshot of the situation in India since the COVID-19 and the lockdown. And the second edition of the report, which is published in December 2020, it looks at the depth and scale of the impact of the pandemic, the studies the developments, actions, and recommendations that will strengthen the creative economy. So at this point, we have two of the reports which are the outcome of taking the temperature survey. And the third round of the survey has recently been launched. And we will be posting a link to that survey in the chat window soon. So all the people who are involved in the creative industries and who are uh, ready to take this survey are more than welcome to do that. The idea of this webinar is really to sort of discuss what is it at stake for the creative industry, the creative economy in the Indian context, post-pandemic, post all the challenges that we've been facing in the last little more than a year, and to take a sort of put a dipstick into the situation and understand where we are, where did we come from, where we are right now, and then thereafter where are we going from here. So without much delay, let me introduce the panel, and I'll start with Sudebi. Sudebi Thakurta is a creative facilitator, narrative designer, educator, futurist, and writer. A faculty member at the Srishti Manipal Institute of Art, Design and Technology for more than a decade. She has co-founded the transdisciplinary design collective called D Epicenter. She designs experiences, engagement, and environments that allow people to think and have dialogue globally by making their thinking and interaction visible to others. She helps people discover their own designs and narratives using different modes and media. She focuses on social, environmental, and cultural issues, interviewing, design thinking, imagination, complex systems thinking, pedagogy, crafts, entrepreneurialism, visual and performing arts, oral history, ethnography, and research to co-create inclusive and regenerative possibilities. So Sudebi is someone who in this panel would probably represent, you can say, the academic side, the academia in the area, in the creative fields, in the creative industry. Along with Sudebi, we have Srinivas Aditya Mupidevi. He is a writer and curator based in New Delhi. In the past decade, he was involved in research and curatorial projects with Park Avenue Armory, Asia Society in New York, and held positions with Devi Art Foundation, Rax Media Collective, Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. He's currently the curator of exhibitions at Terrain.art, a blockchain-powered platform that aims to expand the ways of globally engaging with art from South Asia. So Aditya is someone who represents what is it in store in the arts management sector, and especially with new technology driving a lot of the activities in the art field. We also have Amitesh Grover. He's an award-winning interdisciplinary artist. Inquiring into the art of performance, he moves beyond theater into visual art, film, installation, digital art, participatory and immersive processes. His practice is based on the ephemeral and the conceptual. His works are shown internationally in theaters, galleries, public spaces, and on the internet. He also teaches, writes, and curates for performance. He's a recipient of the Mashfika Award, Ustad Bismillah Khan National Award, and Charles Wallace Award. He's been on numerous residencies, including Brixton Institute in Bristol, UK, Pax Zolliverin, I hope I'm pronouncing them correctly, Germany, Tokyo Culture Creation Project in Japan, Art Center Melbourne, Australia, and Rote Fabric Studios in Switzerland. He's also the artistic director for ITFOK Festival 2019 to 21. I hope I've said the right things, Amitesh. So Amitesh is someone who we hope to get insight from the practice perspective, from the arts practice and multidisciplinary practice perspective. So with this, I would like to sort of dive straight into the conversation. So one of the things that really sort of intrigues probably a lot of people is, what does creative industry really mean? So we really have different notions of what in India we don't really have a very clear definition of what is creative industry. So I think that's the first thing that we want to really understand from all of you. What do we really mean by creative industry? And if we are part of it, what are the ways in which we are part of this industry? So over to you. Maybe we can start with you, Amitesh.
I was hoping that you wouldn't start with me, especially because I'm embedded in practice, and so a lot most of the world I see around me and the people I work with come from creative fields. So it's very difficult for me to define what is ubiquitous, what is everywhere, really. Um, but to try and answer this question, I mean, of course, one of the definitions that can be borrowed very easily is from the creative industries research work that was done as part of Arts Council England program a
Mm-hmm.
few years ago. And this happened because of, especially because of the 2008 financial crisis, which had affected Europe very badly. And as it so happens, the first sort of phase of funding cuts was seen by the cultural sector. And as a counterforce to this measure that was, in sort of impulsively unleashed by the government, many cultural workers got together and started to define what creative industries is and how it contributes to economy, how it contributes to job employment, and should be treated as essential work along with the rest of the employment opportunities. And it's very interesting, actually, that I had the fortune of reading that report. It's very detailed. It distills a lot of creative industries work into numbers, data, statistics. It looks at the kind of impact that cultural work has through a lot of informal settings. Programs that are run, funding platforms that are organized for artists. A lot of work that takes place in the creative industries is also ephemeral in nature. So, and it's also very project based. So there are no permanent jobs that are available there, but it's a very fluid and it has a migratory nature of work. People flow in and out very easily. The borders are open. And so to quantify this kind of work is very difficult. But nonetheless, that report did a fantastic job. It put, I think, at that point, about £2 trillion of contribution to economy as part of the British economy, and thereby proving that creative industries, which was a very broad definition in which they, of course, included all the arts, but they also included many of the industries. So fashion industry got included in creative work. A lot of even a lot of organized work, design labels, filmmaking, um, uh, and a lot of commercial ventures also got included in this. And if you remember, if anyone here who's attending today remembers this, this was adopted by British Council branches across the world. And in around 2010 and or 11, we started to see creative industry entrepreneurship awards that were um, inaugurated by British Council programs across the world. I happen to be one of them who was nominated nominated for it in 2011, I think, and also I was put in touch with several other such nominees across the world. And it was really interesting to see the gambit of what creative industries could be across the world. Now, having said that, the caveat that I would like to include here is that while it was difficult for a country like England to quantify what creative industries is and to collect data, imagine the challenge and the task at hand for a diverse country as ours, where 90% of work that takes place in the creative industries is entirely informal. How do you quantify gharanas of singing? How do you quantify thousands and thousands of street artists who do several jobs and also create art and performances um, in the public domain? And also, how do you quantify the informal settings and the sort of an entire sort of lack of infrastructure within which these projects take place and do not even get documented properly, right? So it's a tough question for a country as diverse as India. Where do you put the folk artists? Where do you put artists who are who don't have the jobs of being artists but are actually sort of born in families who have practiced cultural and heritage performance and traditional work for generations? Would you classify them as artists? Would you classify them as workers? Would you classify them as inheritors of a legacy and a tradition? So there are problems around definition, there are problems around data collection and documentation, but it's an interesting question to ask today.
I would now ask Sudebi, what does she think as from this situation where you are, from your vantage point, how do you see this?
So I think thanks for calling us all here, because it's so interesting to see, the overlapping interest and synergies and also the different vantage points. So I think Amitesh actually has given a very interesting, provocative and well-rounded kind of, I won't say definition, but he sort of probed us into defining in our own ways, how should the creative economy be, defined. I believe that, every time, every incident or every situation demands its own dictionary. We can borrow from the past, but we need to redefine it with the lens of the experiences or the experiential perspectives or the lived narratives of that time. And I feel that in the current times, I would say that even what constitutes creative economy, what constitutes creative economy, even in a particular geopolitical context, because rightly, as he said, that I don't think there is one unified definition of what you mean by creative economy, say in England and say in India. It's not quite the same. Our ways of being, our ways of doing, our ways of making are different, but more importantly, our ways of sense making are so different that I feel that, if you have to make sense of what does the creative economy mean in today's time, it really needs to constitute of stories of the pandemic and people's narratives of of that. But having said that, I would say that if there is one thing, at least in my experience, that sort of becomes a glue to anything which I feel is the creative economy, that is culture. And culture is that glue that sort of binds different aspects of whatever can make the creative economy. Because I feel like, first of all, there are hierarchies, in what is folk, what is classical. I mean, who really becomes an artist or a designer? Is it by training? Is it by getting a degree or a certificate? Is it by your practice? Is it intergenerationally? What is it? And these are fuzzy questions. And I think where I'm coming from is, I mean, although I am in the world of academia and I happen to do a lot of work across the globe, not just in India, but I feel have had the good fortune in the last many years, and particularly in the last 1 year, to work across many countries, both in South Asia and Southeast Asian countries, working with people who are practitioners, who are working with practitioners in different fields, and also in certain parts of Europe and in certain parts of the US. And I feel that that has been my sense, or my little experience, that if one thing that has been the underpinning of anything when people said about creative economy, it was culture. Something that you either derive from culture, or you sort of use culture to make sense, or somewhere culture is used to sort of bring an economy, I would say. So yeah, that's my perspective.
So that's interesting, because when you talk of culture as a binder that sort of weaves that thread across all these different ways in which it is expressed. So that's really what the creative industry is about. It's an expression of culture. It's an expression of what I mean, going back to what Amitesh said, and what you're also saying. And I think that's really the beauty of this country as well, when we try to define the creative industry in India. Now, how do we look at this in a way that's in some ways quantifiable? So I mean, I would request Aditya to give his views on how do we really quantify this, so very you can say amorphous entity.
Yeah, you gave the most quantifying task to someone who's not usually used to quantifying. But I would actually say that one of the, you can hear me fine, right? Okay. Still?
I think yeah, there's a drop in the signal, it looks like.
Okay. Tell me if it's still okay. Sorry.
It's now you're audible, but the video is a little.
I think you could switch off your video. Would be better.
Yeah, maybe. No, one of the things that I was saying is that just to go back to that question of what is cultural industry, is also most dependent upon who is asking this question. Is British Council asking the question, Indian government asking, independent practitioners asking the question?
We are not able to hear you.
A little.
I think we'll have to probably wait till his connection gets a little better. We'll catch up with that. In the meanwhile, I mean, again, I want to just pose this other question, which is how do I mean, pose the question back actually. How do we really quantify this? How do we really quantify it from a sense making perspective? Open question.
It's very difficult to quantify it. I mean, if I can sort of, if Aditya allows me retrospectively, of course, to complete his sentence, who is asking that question? That's a very important sort of question to start from. Is the government asking that question? Is the culture ministry asking that question? Is British Council or a foreign entity asking that question? I think these answers will vary depending on the parameters of how we define what culture and creative industries should be. But when I mentioned this, the example of the Arts Council in England to begin to quantify, see, their intention was not so much as to actually come up with an objective quantification of what creative industries is. Their intention was a counterforce to effectively make it difficult for the government to cut funding at the drop of hat at any instance. So if the economy shrinks, you cut culture funding. If there's a pandemic or a crisis, you cut culture funding. This is exactly what happened when the lockdown was announced last year. One of the first things that got banned was public assembly, and also infrastructure that allowed for public assembly to take place, which is and the top on the list was theaters. So, you know, where are the theater workers supposed to go? How are they supposed to? It's almost like, you know, thinking about the equivalent of this would be to completely put your screen under lockdown so that you're not able to watch Netflix, Amazon, not able to watch songs, etc. And so you take that medium completely away for a year. How are people supposed to access culture and creative industries? How are what people who are entirely dependent on these mediums, how are they supposed to survive? And this was an indefinite lockdown. We didn't know when this was going to. So what is, I mean, what is interesting here for us is not so much an objective study of what creative industries is, but to effectively quantify for the intention that it becomes difficult for the government to cut and roll back funding. Because what happens in the name, what goes on in the name of creative industries and culture is this really ambiguous, fuzzy, um, ephemeral kind of work that takes place somewhere. Nobody knows how it happens. Nobody knows the kind of sacrifices and the struggles that artists go through to put that work up. Um, and you know, and that when it disappears, that nobody notices. So the objective of this study is to actually foreground this kind of work, and not so much as to objectively quantify this work.
That's right. That's right. In fact, if you in the report, wherever when you go through the report, the general feel that you get is about actually not about the quantifying part, though that is a big part of the report. It is also about trying to pick those dots that actually can connect for how to go ahead from here. And one of themes that's constantly which has emerged at least from the second report is actually about digitization or digitalization of creative industry. Is that really a possibility? Sudebi, would you like to?
Okay, sure. I think it's a topic of like very, very close to my heart, you know, and I'll tell you why. Because I think, I mean, for many years, I would say I have been struggling with this whole quick fix mindset people have about everything, right? You just want to have a solution to everything. And I saw that although in a way the pandemic could have allowed us that pause to kind of reimagine things, it didn't sort of do that. I mean, why I'm saying this is that when we are talking about creative economy, my question is, are we having a creative response to the crisis of creative economy, or our responses are age old, you know? I mean, if you use the lens of the past where you had assumptions about what is good, what the needs are, etc., even with respect to economy, even with respect to what is good or etc., for a country or for a community, and you suddenly realize, drawing upon certain words from Amitesh, that ambiguity, fuzzy, right? And most human beings don't like fuzziness and ambiguity, but then here we are. The pandemic has taught us that that's our reality, you know, uncertainty, ambiguity are our reality. And somewhere the field of arts, the field of design, the field of culture allows you to navigate these worlds in very meaningful way. And the factor that I'm trying to bring in over here is that when you have a crisis for something which is happening externally, which is affecting a sector or a whole bunch of people who um, are absolutely instrumental to the well-being of the society, right? How can you have a very stereotypical, very quick solution that digitalization or a very so-called cliched way of looking at technology will actually be solving the problem? Because we haven't really spent enough time to know whether the nature of the problem is what is coming out in a very apparent way through a survey or something of that sort. And I'll probably bring in a narrative over here. I like narratives. I remember last year around this time, you know, sometime in like late March or the third week of March, there was an article that I had read in Harvard Business Review, and I before the pandemic hit, a few times a year, I used to travel to a lot of Southeast Asian countries. It's a British Council and Mekong Cultural Hub co-curated program where I facilitate and design a creative collaboration amongst different cultural practitioners in 10 countries, and this sudden shift of whatever happened, everything came to a standstill. The whole program was dependent on experiential perspectives and meeting in person and actually coming up with creative collaboration. So when that kind of happened and we realized that for the next couple of years or more, nobody can travel, the whole nature of the program is going to change. Obviously, all of us were taken aback. And I remember sometime in March, we were having a meeting with people and they were practitioners from the Philippines, from Myanmar and Vietnam and Laos and Taiwan and many other countries and the UK as well. I remember there was this conversation sort of came through, dependent on the Harvard Business Review article. It talked about this feeling of discomfort that all of us are feeling is actually grief. And if anyone here has read, the 5 stages of grief, and then you sort of know that it starts with denial and it gets to anger and then it gets to bargaining and so on and so forth, right? And the HBR article actually interviewed the co-author, along with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who spoke about the stages of grief, David Kessler, who actually had talked about the 6th stage of grief. And he spoke about after you come to acceptance, because last year around this time, people had grief, right? There was absolute denial of what was happening, right? And he said that eventually people will accept it. And acceptance kind of gives you a sense of control. But he also spoke about going beyond that 5th stage of grief, which is what is called meaning. And I feel that that is something that we are sort of not doing so much. And I would prefer that even when we see a report of this sort, where you see data, you see certain kinds of losses in a very tangible way that people and industries are having, right? But what does that loss really signify? Because last year, around this time, people had what is called anticipatory grief. You had anticipation about the future, what it holds and all of that. Right now, it's not so much of anticipation. But then you have an assumptive, I mean, I'm using my own language to define it. It's an assumptive kind of solutioning for that grief or for the sense of loss. And hence what's happening is you're giving quick solutions like digitalization. And I'm not against digitalization, but I'm saying it comes with its own nuances of ethics. It comes with its own sense of well-being. And, as World Economic Forum says, that well-being and well-doing are interconnected. And how do you sort of incorporate what is intangible, those intangible parts of the narrative, because when you talk about support, which comes as a next step, right? That there is a problem that has happened, there are losses that have happened, and then you invest and we sort of say that make policy level changes, ask the government, ask CSR and other things, right? And let's invest. I would say what kind of investment is really required? I mean, are we looking at investment at the level of well-being of people who are in this industry? Does it really consider their individual voices and the collective voices? Are we saying that the investments can be also about the time to try and fail, the time to make sense of the ambiguities of our time, and that's what I'm saying, that if we consider solutioning as such, where creativity becomes a commodity, and I'm not saying intentionally it happens, sometimes unintentionally it happens, that poses other kinds of threats and dangers, because I know of a lot of artists and practitioners who are very worried about people giving them chances to come. Things are recorded. Their existential threats are coming out when they're saying, if my performance is recorded, first of all, are people really engaging with my practice? Am I being converted or reduced to a content provider as opposed to a creative practitioner? So those are questions I would pose.
This is a very interesting question, because I've been faced with a similar issue with crafts. So the whole idea of getting artisans training out to the larger world, where people cannot actually go and engage with themselves. So is a digital platform actually bridging that gap? You see, it may not be bridging the gap, but it's also reaching out to a much larger amount of people. So it's a contradictory situation that we are finding here. And the report also, in the report, there's a lot of expression about how the support that comes from various quarters for the creative industries. And a lot of that is aimed towards, you can say, government support or some kind of professional support. Amitesh, you were mentioning about the supports, the grants and other things that probably were cut down in a certain situation. How do we see this going ahead? Because support, I personally have not been someone who is in favor of supporting anything unless there is something literally able to come out of it. Now, the problem with creative industries, you cannot quantify what is the outcome in terms of tangible this thing. The benefits are very, very subliminal. They are very they go through the sub uh, what substrate of our existence. So I want to know how, what is this? What does support mean? What could support mean? What kind of support are the corporates supposed to support? What are they getting out of it? I mean, this whole question of support.
I'll start with an anecdote, actually, Shashi. I'm invited to, as a jury member and as an advisor, I'm invited to several tech labs. IITs have tech labs. They call it development labs, where they look at the students, often in their post graduation or at the level of PhDs, are looking at the next possible thing in technology. So they build something, they build a prototype, and then they invite people to look at it. And they're often looking for what is possible with it. So they've made it, but they don't have an idea what's possible with it. What does it mean, actually? And should they make it or not? And this is not just an economic question. It's also a philosophical question. Should they go ahead and make it just because it's possible? I mean, this is the deepest philosophical question around the atomic bomb was exactly this. Yes, it's possible, but should we make it? When you look at the arts and when you look at the artist, I would believe that the artist actually spends a lot of time making a philosophical investment in work. Not just because something is possible is why we make it, is because there is some meaning that is found in it, and that's why we make it. And very often this meaning is useless. This doesn't have this meaning doesn't have a very direct use value for economy. But if you I teach interactive art at an art university, and there I give several examples of how a lot of what today is the virtual and digital industry was actually an artistic experiment 40 years ago, right? Look at virtual reality, for example. This was within MIT labs and within several other labs in which artists and technologists were collaborating, that they were just playing around with the possibility of, say, interactive software, interactive hardware, right? What is today your PS1s, PS2s, and PS3s were actually artistic proposals in the 1980s. So art and artists are also harbingers of the future. We're sort of working in this. We're working in this area which we actually don't know and we're not familiar with right now, and sometimes it's a complete failure, of course, and sometimes it's successful, and it depends on what you call success and what you call failure, also. So why wouldn't you want to support something like this? Why wouldn't you actually? Why wouldn't any government, any society, any?
It's mostly just there. I just have to call the carpenter. The owner doesn't know.
Or did we just snoop into somebody's domestic conversation?
It looks like.
So just to finish that thought, I mean, why wouldn't any society or any culture create this space where the future can be thought about instead of bumped into. You know, we keep bumping into the future. We keep playing catch up with what's happening elsewhere, despite having a very rich tradition of philosophical thought, of crafts, of arts. Um, and I think that this support actually goes a long way in creating that nebulous space.
Very true. Uh, very true. In fact, it's always the question: what comes first? Is it the pushing the envelope by the creative industry that brings in the change that others follow, or have we given ourselves up to the so-called powers to help us get to that? No, I think it's really a question of which comes first, and our ability to answer that question would become part of how the future is going to be, which now brings me to the other part of our discussion, which is also, I mean, already we have touched upon it a little bit, is where do we see? So I'm a design teacher, right? So, and I get various kind of queries from students, prospective students, whoever. I mean, the whole world asks questions of what is going to happen in the future. Where are we as creative people? Where can we see ourselves? Where are we planning to be? Where do we go? So that's something that I always say that when the world goes towards a structured way of automating and doing things on its own, and AI and various other things that come into the picture, what's actually left of us as human beings is creativity, right? And that creativity is what actually is the pull factor that takes everything ahead. So with that, I want to know, I mean, based on the report and based on what people have said so far, either in a proactive manner or in a reactive manner, where do we really think that our creative industry, how do we see it going ahead? So Aditya has joined us back again. So uh, maybe I can start with you to get your views on where are we going? What is your sense of where we are going?
I'm going to turn off the video, hoping that I won't fall off again in between. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So one of the things as a curator for me, the biggest question is that right now I've been working a lot on online exhibitions, and also I've been working all my life, like in the curatorial career, on physical exhibitions and the act of making them. So in a way, the challenge that it poses is that it looks like that it's going to be a simultaneous habitat. It looks like it is something that we have to continue to adapt as we go into the future. Otherwise, what happens is that as much as we are skeptical about what the online does and what the offline does, it is also important to kind of flag new forms of community making and everything that happened in the wake of the pandemic. Like, for example, I'm thinking about ArtChain India, which is basically started by a few artists and creative practitioners as a peer support system, which has risen to a huge network of people across the country. And also advising a lot of artists about how to sell your work, how to legally represent your work, how to think about copyright, a lot of issues that are otherwise not accessible to the artists who are in the remote parts of the country. So on the one hand, yes, the creative industry has strained from the pandemic. On the other hand, there are these informal initiatives that have changed the scope of what is it that we're actually looking into the future. So one of the questions that I kind of ask, and this is the question that came in the beginning, is that do we really have to wait for the pandemic to understand the inconsistencies of our own creative sector? Do we really, and if we found these inconsistencies, and how do we look into the future, both in the digital and the online and offline sense of it? And especially for me personally, as an exhibition making practitioner, I have to think about both simultaneously, because one, online gives me the opportunity to reach to the world at large of artists that are located in remote parts of the country, which is an advantage. And then B, people are more attentive right now to what is happening in different parts of the world than they were, like, let's say, a year ago. So in that way, I think as we look into the future, somewhere we have to embrace not celebrate, I would say more embrace and understand the ways in which these things are kind of more complementing each other and working with each other rather than trying to put them against each other. I would like to walk into a physical exhibition, but at the same time, I'm also interested in how much I can push the envelope of an experience online so that the world can see.
Yeah, I like the term you use, simultaneity. You know, the whole simultaneity of experiences, whether they are happening at the same time or at different times. And I think that holds a lot of potential for practitioners, and leveraging technology in a way that actually is useful and not not as a substitute for something else. So
Yeah, I would agree with Aditya, actually, word for word. I think my own personal experience is also of not registering physical and online spaces in opposition to each other, but actually as extensions of each other. They leak, no? The physical spaces leak into digital spaces, and the digital spaces leak back into physical spaces. We see this all the time in our society and around us now. And so when the theater shut and performers and theater workers, everybody ran out of work. I mean, we had to come up with, we had to adapt and come up with different ideas. So I created a work, a cyber theater work, in which I was working with coders, programmers to actually build a virtual space, a virtual city within which performances could take place. And curated a set of performers who performed live. And it took us about 6-7 months to make this project. But this was like an interdisciplinary project where several people of different disciplines who actually had not worked together came together to build this. And we performed this at the Serendipity Arts Festival last December, which was entirely online. And there were several other projects of this nature, not just mine, but several other artists I could see that they are already adapting, and not just adapting for the sake of translating from one medium to another, but also embracing the artistic possibilities and the politics of these different mediums. It would be foolish to think that the digital comes with the same set of politics and challenges and questions that the physical space comes with. While Shashi, you rightly mentioned that access and reach, for example, has exploded with the digital, where before performers, for example, were limited by the physical infrastructure of a theater. Now by performing online, for example, the work that I created reached about 1,000 people across just 4 shows. And this is something that is unthinkable if one were to actually hire an auditorium to perform this work. At the same hand, I mean, we were working absolutely blind. We didn't know who were watching. And the joy of working in a physical space in a gallery or an auditorium is that you actually are able to see the people who come to watch your work and interact with them. It was quite difficult to actually work, create and perform while not knowing who and how many are watching you. And I think this is something that we need to sort of, as an artist, I'm thinking a lot about. What happens to intimacy and interrelational sort of experience when I create art online. In some ways, perhaps for some disciplines, it's easy. For paintings, for sculptures, and for visual-based work, maybe it's easy. But what do I do if my body is involved? And if the smell and the touch and the taste of this corporeal form is involved, how does that translate across the coldness of the screen and the network?
I think we have to wait for the 4th dimension to come into the picture. Yes, Sudevi, you're saying something.
Yeah, I said I totally agree with both Aditya and Amitesh, and I think that the thing is that is basically what I was trying to say when I was saying that we sort of need to focus on the meaning aspect of loss and grief, because I think the stories that you have, the stories of the pandemic, like the stories that all of you are sharing, are what can help us in figuring out the simultaneous narratives, as you're calling them, right? Because I think we are so used to having, like, being on one end of a duality or a binary, that we sort of don't understand that there can be coexistence of both, and that needs imagination. And I would say that my personal learning and discovery has been that, I mean, even right now things are evolving, right? So but then in that evolution of different ways of being, different ways of seeing, different ways of even reacting or behaving with things, if we can sort of shift from imitation of a solution which has worked somewhere and rather be inspired by it, if we sort of shift from information that we're getting from someone, say an arts practitioner, and say, oh, this has worked beautifully, but then can I have my own interpretation of it and add my own imagination and reimagine what I can do in this space, because like you're saying, that it's not just that I'm changing as a practitioner, the audience is changing, the medium is changing. So I feel that that is where more time investment needs to be there. And that's what I was saying, that I've seen a lot of times when you're hit with a problem or something of this sort, where people are calling it a crisis, you tend to kind of focus on what is urgent, what is immediate, and not what is long term. And I somehow feel that the pandemic somewhere has opened up a door where I feel that any creative practitioner today probably would be more confident to face a potential funder and say what you earlier called as not so needed actually is needed, because the world is not as linear as you used to think, right? I mean, we have realized that fuzziness is something that has to be a part of our lives. Ambiguity has to be a part of our lives. And we can't just say that when you're cutting costs somewhere. I know of this. It's a crisis a lot of people face, even in a pre-pandemic world, right? Almost like to convince, why should someone fund a creative production? I feel that we can actually support and justify why is it really required, because it's a new way to sort of connect to each other and feel a sense of community. It's a different ecosystem that's getting generated, and that's the potential. And I feel that cultural sectors should ideally be the drivers of change for future, and not the other way around.
Yeah, so would that mean that we are really looking at a new era of collaboration? Are we looking at a new era of collaboration, an entirely new shift in the way the practitioners collaborate with each other, looking at the simultaneity, looking at the technology, looking at the need, and when we start looking at things not from a cost economy perspective, but from a meaning perspective, from a need perspective, when we try to collaborate at that level. I think practitioners have always tried to collaborate at that level, but have been limited by various factors, which probably are now not, now there. Now we're kind of running out of time. I think we have about 10 minutes left. So one last round from everyone. So maybe you can go first, and then we go the clockwise direction right now. You're on mute.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm saying this is also an interesting thing. The clockwise is kind of relative, because on my screen it's anti-clockwise as we are going. Anyways, jokes apart, I feel that if there's one thought that I would like to leave with, I feel that any kind of findings that we have about what has happened and what could happen, I feel that if we can sort of look at it with the lens of dignity, it really helps. Because why I'm talking about dignity is that what does dignity mean for an individual, for a collective, for a whole industry, So if I want to move forward like I was earlier, I need to know how to enable someone to be able to move forward with dignity. If someone has to change ways of being, we need to facilitate that changes of moving on in a different way with dignity. And more importantly, if someone has to decide that, okay, it needs to stop, what I was doing in the past, somewhere I can't move forward with that, that closing down also needs to happen with dignity. And I feel that we need to be aware of that, because that's really fair. If we talk about equity and diversity and inclusion, and everyone talks about it these days, I mean, but real implementation of that is actually questioning, is it really giving dignity to a community? Is it giving dignity to the whole ecosystem? That's my thought, I would say.
In my screen, clockwise next is Amit.
Can't hear you. You're muted.
I was saying in my screen, the next clockwise was Amitesh.
Okay. Um, there are two thoughts that I would like to us to leave with. One is, of course, to revisit, and there's this wonderful I don't know, many people don't know about this actually, but there was a UNESCO World Conference in 1980, which recommended, concerns around the status of the artist. Um, and this was done in 1980. They met in Belgrade, and India is actually a signing member to this. And some of the points there are very interesting. The recommendation from this UNESCO General Conference actually recognized that every artist is entitled to benefit effectively from the social security and insurance provisions contained in the preamble of this conference. And this is something that we actually were fighting for when the lockdown hit India last year, that there are no social or security nets for artists working in India. And because he spoke about digitality, digitality was one way in which support and relief work was coordinated and circulated across the country by artists, by people who are working in this field. And without this digitality, actually, this kind of spontaneous relief work could not have been organized. The second, of course, is that the action against artists by public authorities that was leading to a very disquieting situation. And it has led to several artists and poets being incarcerated and falsely accused in many of the member states. And this has been going since 1980. So many people think that this is a very recent phenomenon in a country like India, but actually it's been going on for quite some time. And protection for artists from what I call the virus of power. And for all countries to sort of recognize the essential role of art in the life and development of individual and the society, and to recognize the work that artists do as essential work. So this has to become part of some kind of a sort of a national consciousness, that what artists do is actually essential work. So this was one thought, and this has been pending since 1980. It's been 41 years that we are sitting on this. We are signatories to this conference, and nothing in this preamble has been implemented in a country like ours. And so the pandemic only exposed these gaps that should have been bridged now. And one of my and the final sort of thought would be that one of my sort of favorite cultural theorists, Paul Virilio, had said that when you invent the ship, you also invent the shipwreck. Um, and so when we think about, I think when we think about the new, we also need to think about the new wreckage that will come along. Yeah, that would be my final thought.
Very interesting. Aditya?
Yeah, I actually will take that from the idea of the wreck, because for me, it's always very interesting, especially when it comes to artistic context, is that the materiality of the art object is only visible when it is broken or damaged. Until then, there is an aura that is around it. So it's interesting that the inconsistency visible is at the moment of a threat. And I always kind of go back to this South African philosopher, Achille Mbembe, who talks about the idea of reparation and how post-colonial Africa actually kind of thought about different forms of reparation as a form of resilience. And then it's interesting for me to, while we are inventing new systems, there is also systems of repair that has to come back. Not to kind of say that one system replaces the other, but there are so many things that needs to be not given up, but maybe kind of somewhere fixed, because the threat that we have today makes the cracks visible more than they were before. And it's been something that's going on. It's just that we are shedding light on it. And I think going forward, it is, I don't know if formalization is the answer to that question, because most of our country's creative industry also works in an informal thing, but we have to kind of figure out how do we build structures as we move into the future. So if God forbid nothing should happen, but tomorrow be faced with a situation like this, we are actually more agile and prepared that, okay, we can at least have learned lessons from the past. That's just like the last 1 year and the recent, like, as we get out of this, hopefully we'll get out of this sooner than later. Yeah.
Very, very, very well put. And in fact, I think the creative industry is one that will always learn from what has happened. I mean, I think we are the first people to learn from what has happened much faster and much before anybody else. People have, life has this rubber band effect, right? It goes forward and then it pulls back and then comes back again. But we are always at the end of that rubber band, which is pulling it ahead. And I think with that sort of an attitude, we will always, the creative industries will always be able to show the way in one form or the other. At least show the way. Now, to make it accepted, to make those bridges between different constituencies, I think that's really the task at hand for all of us. And I think we have almost run out of time. If I think we can take a few questions if there are any, or otherwise we can wind up the session. And it was amazing to talk to all three of you. Very interesting to we've asked questions. Really, we have not we were not here. The intent was not to give answers at this point, but at least ask the right questions and be a sort of mirror to the report, and take that as a backdrop for other endeavors that each one of us and the audience would be taking up. So I thank you thank all of you, Sudebi, Amitesh, and Aditya, for being here and spending so much time. Thank you to ADI for organizing this, along with Artex, who've been the sort of backbone to this whole report, and the British Council, as well as FICCI. Okay, so thank you very much once again. It was my pleasure to speak to you, and I hope the audience have also got going back better informed and with some more new ideas on how to go about doing things in their own creative pursuits.
Thank you, Shashi.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.